This has been quite a week, and we're happy that you're here with us to find some peace this evening. Welcome, and welcome, Zoomers. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to the Zoomers and hope that more of you can come in person in weeks to follow. There is a feeling in this sanctuary that just doesn't come through a Zoom screen all the time. And I would be so happy to see more of you here with us for these special guests that we have. So this month is a month of nonviolence. How coincidental is that? I'm sure many of you have been looking at the news and seeing headlines, and perhaps you have personal wounds from what's going on in the world at the moment. And here we are. It's almost prophetic how we wind up with an entire month of nonviolent talks. And more than ever, we need to find that peace. And we find it here. And that's why you come every week, right? You come for the same reasons I started coming years ago, became a student here. And this is the road to peace we learn here is an inward journey. And it's funny because here at Harmony House, I'll let you in on a little secret. We don't stay glued to the news. We don't turn on the TV and sit for hours. We don't. Our hearts are with all the suffering in the world, and it gets pretty close to home if you have relatives, as I do, who are very upset right now because of family. We deliberately don't feed that part of ourselves. We stay on the banks and we don't jump into the quicksand. So we have, and you come here now, you have a role with your families, as we do, to be that angel who can be there for someone else who's in a lot of pain, even when we're fighting the pain ourselves. So this will be, we will talk about whatever you want to talk about this evening, and to inaugurate, continue the theme of nonviolence, the silent power for lasting peace. We have Brother Tony Figueroa, who is going to talk about how nonviolence does not begin with conflict. It begins with a first thought. Before there's any friction, we think, right? Without a thought, we don't have fears. Without a thought, the what ifs, it's future thinking, and it turns us up and keeps us in a place we don't feel comfortable in. So no matter what's going on, if you're lying on a beach enjoying the sun, or you're listening to the radio and hearing things you don't want to hear, things that are scary, then you have a choice to tune out, come here, and go inward. Of course, Raj Yoga meditation is our big secret, right? Okay, so the question tonight is, if it begins with a first thought, are we first responders or are we reactors? And Brother Tony is going to discuss this with us. And the topic for tonight is first, do no harm. Because we really do believe that nonviolence begins with what you're thinking, how you're behaving, what actions you take comes last, right? So, Brother Tony, do you have that bio? Yeah, I hit something and I lost. He's an architect. Thank you so much.
Oh. Antonio Figueroa is an architect and planner in New York City and currently manages his own private practice. He's a student of Raja meditation for over 20 years and facilitates retreats for his professional community and participates in programs to further the understanding of spirituality, particularly, and you'll hear this, in a practical and in his professional life.
So much, Sister Michelle. So, and he will talk about the topic, first, do no harm. Very interesting. We had a conversation this afternoon and I learned a lot from Brother Tony, and I know you will also. So without further ado, Brother Tony, stage is yours. Om Shanti.
No, I'm fine. The subject of nonviolence is something that, for me, I find the term nonviolence a little bit difficult because it's like an oxymoron, right? Nonviolence. I mean, already by saying it, there's some sort of implication about it. So nonviolence as a concept is basically an activist concept that the people in India, led by Mahatma Gandhi, used to deal with what they felt was an injustice. And in the United States, by Martin Luther King, a very prominent person who used the same kind of philosophy to make change, to make social change. But there are other kind of definitions of nonviolence that I find, for me, are more kind of engaging. The other one is the definition in the Hindu tradition, basically tradition in India, Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, is called ahimsa, which is basically you do no violence to any living thing, no harm to yourself, to others, to anything in nature. It's a very to me a much more kind of fundamental. It's not a question of you're not dealing with violence. You're just dealing with the fact that you're not going to get involved in doing anything that's going to be in any way detrimental to your environment. The last part of this that I was looking up, and it's my favorite, is the Hippocratic Oath, attributed to Hippocrates, although apparently it's not clear that he actually wrote this. One of the things he said, and I wrote this down, in Latin term, it says primum no nocere, which means, translated literally, is first do no harm. And to me, that is the most appropriate term for us to be able to look at the theme of violence, because nonviolence philosophy in social activism is something that's already a conflict that's involved. Ahimsa is a philosophy, a way of life that unfortunately is not something that we are experienced in. There are people in that part of the world that have very strong convictions. There was a famous Nobel-winning scientist that used to do experiments, and when he finished, he would go back, put the bacteria back where he found it in the earth and wherever he did. He was very, very committed to that particular philosophy. But for us here, we live in this world, so how do we deal with the whole issue of violence? And to me, the term first do no harm is so compelling because it's like it tells you what you do first. And I feel it's very important term because I think it affects everyone. Hippocrates was talking about, or his disciples were talking about, when you're a doctor, you don't want to make anybody sicker. So go to treat somebody, you make sure you don't create any more problems. But I think I take the term for everything, for example, for the ecology, for sustainability. When you do something, and I'm an architect, for example, when you do a building, you don't want to do any harm to the environment or to the world you're in or to nature. You want to make sure that what you do is not going to make things worse, that what you do is going to be at least neutral. In any kind of context, first do no harm, I think, is a term that's really very important. And it leads me to the kind of my basic premise about nonviolence is that it doesn't start with conflict, because when you have conflict, you already have a potential violence. You have the seed of violence is already there. It starts with a thought. So the whole basis of violence starts with how you deal with the situation. what's that first thought that you have? What is it that you do when you're presented with a situation that's potentially adversarial, or maybe not even adversarial? So, kind of a traditional examples. You're driving along, minding your own business, being very judicious and in your driving, and somebody cuts you off. This happens sometimes before people even realize somebody pulls a gun, and they're having road rage incidents of all this, just somebody cutting you off. And I'm guilty of that too, because I see someone cuts me off, I get angry right away. Saying, "What? How can they do this? This is my lane. You shouldn't be touching my lane. I'm good. I'm not getting into anybody's way. Why are they getting into mine?" So the issue of the first thought is very important. An example also is someone says something about you. Someone says, no, or more importantly, someone comes and says they're upset because they heard that you said this bad thing about them, that this person was, I don't know, compulsive or opinionated or something like that. Then you said that. Now, you may not have said that, but the person you're dealing with is convinced that you said something about them that was negative. So then what is your reaction to that? And this is where the whole notion of first thought is important. Do you respond? Do you say, okay, I don't know what was said. If something I said was misinterpreted, I apologize. It was never my intention, right? Or do you say, I never said that. Who said that? What is this? This is someone is accusing me of something. So you have two different scenarios you're looking at. When your first thought is of conflict, someone said something about you that you said something and you're not, it's not true. So your reaction immediately is to say, deny it, disagree, get angry. Meanwhile, the person that's saying that to you, they're already angry because they heard that you said something bad about them. So you got one person angry on one side, and then the other person getting angry. Doesn't work out real well. That doesn't end real well. The first thought is what makes it really defines the outcome. Not what you do afterwards. It's the first thought. Your first thought is, well, this is an insult to me. How can they do that? I'm an upstanding person. I don't do stuff like that. I never say anything bad about anybody. And it may be true. Okay? That's the other thing. That's even worse when you know it's true. Then you're even more indignant. And you're even angrier. Meanwhile, the person in front of you is very upset because they think that you said something bad about them. And you're getting angry at them for believing it. Doesn't sound like a really viable arrangement. Okay? You're not going to a good place with this, right? These are things that we all experience. All of us go through this. It's not something unique. So that is the first kind of understanding you have to have about violence. It begins with that moment. How do you respond as opposed to react? If you react, you're indignant, you're upset, there's an insult. How can they do this? I'm never do anything like that. I never do anything like that. I never speak about anybody in that way. Meanwhile, you have a person in front of you who's very upset, and you're not making them feel any better by doing that. Or do you, that's a reaction. Or do you respond and say, okay, maybe someone misinterpreted what I said. Maybe what I said was taken out of context. And if you tell the person, okay, I'm sorry if that, what I said is interpreted that way, wasn't my intent, you have to diffuse the situation. You have to stop the negative understanding, the negative thought. You have to make sure that the other person is not getting angrier. They're already angry. So you might have to say, okay, let's try to take this down. So nonviolence for me starts with the first thought. How do you respond to any situation? How do you deal with this? And if you're dealing with it has to do with your ego and that I'm being insulted, I'm this upright person, I'm very truthful, then that's not going to do very well. You're going to have a situation that is not going to work out, at least at the moment, not particularly well. Maybe when everybody calms down. But so nonviolence really has to begin at that moment where something presents itself. And you need to say, okay, we're not going in this direction. We're going to look at this differently. The other example, subject on which I am extremely experienced in, is when you have a position that you're dealing with, you're in a kind of exchange, and you feel that you're correct, and you may even know that you're correct. There may be even, you're making an assertion, and you feel you're correct. You feel you're saying and explaining things and making a point in a particular way, and that you're correct. You're right. Somehow that results in an argument. So, and you, in fact, may be right. You may be correct. Your position may be absolutely consistent with the truth. But why is there a conflict? Well, like I said, in my experience, for me, it's because the whole point of that kind of exchange is because I want to prove that I'm right. All right? I'm not interested in listening to somebody else. I'm interested because I want to know that I'm right. Because I have all these facts. I have the truth on my side. Somehow we still have a conflict. Somehow it's still an issue. So it's not a question of being right. It's a question of doing right. And too often when we feel we have defined a situation accurately and truthfully, that, well, this is the reality of the world. But it isn't. It's your reality. It's your perception. The actual reality for someone else may be very different. And that's a really important kind of distinction you need to make. It's not a question of you being right, being correct. Because if you're with somebody else, you're in engagement. What is the point of the engagement? Is the point to prove that you're right? That to show that you know something? Or is the engagement that two people are going to come together and have an exchange and maybe together learn something new or different? Right? So if the exchange is only that you're going to prove a point, and again, there's an example I'm very familiar with, then you have a problem. Because even if everything you said was right, even if you're correct in every way, even if there is no question about your position, the fact that you're in some sort of an argument already indicates that you're wrong. You already made the mistake because there's an argument. If you were doing it right, there wouldn't be an argument. There wouldn't be conflict. So you're doing something wrong. You're not wrong. You're not incorrect. You're not untruthful, but you're doing something wrong because there is a conflict. And what is the point of that conflict if not to assert your ego? And again, you're doing this with another person. So your intent is to engage that other person, right? So here we are, and we're saying everything I said is correct, but somehow there's a problem. You're the problem. It's your issue because you want to make the point. And you think that point is very important because you think of yourself being important. We don't think about it quite that way, but when you do it in retrospect, you realize that's the point. I'm very important because I know this reality. So it's very essential for us to think. I think the term was think before we think. Okay? Think, what exactly am I doing? If I am with you and I'm talking with you, then it's a dialogue. It's not a monologue. And if you're talking to someone that you have some sort of personal relationship with, then you're trying to do something together. You're not trying to assert a particular position. And that I think is also part of the issue of nonviolence. Not getting to the point where the information that you're sharing becomes the point of contention. If you're sharing something, it should be something that both of you are getting benefit out of it. Not just one saying this is right and the other one saying I don't understand or I disagree. This is very critical in terms of how we just deal with someone. If we think, where does this conversation start? Where does this exchange start? And it starts with your thought and your intent. And if you examine that, then you have a better chance of getting an outcome that's more consistent with the fact that you're getting together with someone and it's going to be an exchange of some sort. And it's not becoming a point where you're making an issue. Of course, most of us have also been on the receiving end of that. Someone is making a point. And that point is something that we may not agree with. And again, we may be correct. Does that really help? I mean, I've had this situation with my family, argument with my sister about politics. And I believe absolutely that I'm correct and that she's wrong. That doesn't help our relationship at all. That doesn't make things any better. I don't get any satisfaction out of these exchanges. So obviously, there's something wrong, irrespective of whether my position is correct or not. There's something wrong because there is a relationship that's being affected by this exchange. Because we're arguing about something and one of us or both of us are really convinced that we're correct, which means we cannot really hear what the other person is saying. So that also, and we're on the receiving end of that also. So obviously the way to diffuse that is basically you have to listen to other people. You have to say whatever they have to say and not necessarily make it into an exchange, a confrontation. So when you start defending yourself, you already know you're in trouble. You already know you have a problem. When you start defending yourself or when you start asserting yourself. Louise and I had a discussion about the word assertion, which I think is one of the things that we were trying to figure out. Assertion, to me, when you assert something, there's already a value. You feel you're correct. You're asserting something. And we're trying to distinguish assertive from assertiveness, which means people that are not permitting themselves to be bullied or pushed around. But to me, the term assertion is still very important because when you're going to a process in which you're asserting something, asserting a position, not asserting yourself necessarily, but asserting, you're making a point. And that, I believe, is that where the problem starts. If you start, instead of doing assertion, if you start by trying to be gentle, trying to be kind in your initial thought, okay? Whatever your position is, you go something gentle, something kind, that becomes your thought. Then the issue of assertion is not that critical. It's not that important. So Luis, we talked about this. I think you had some reaction to this term, and we had some debate on it. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that and see, because that's a term that we both had different kind of experience in. So
about it was that especially with the women's movement and aiming for equality in any issue you're talking about politically or whatever, it became very important to be heard and to assert your independence and to stand for and express your beliefs. And constantly we hear expressions like, I shouldn't be treated that way. I don't deserve this. Why are they doing that? And I know I learned here that esteemable acts get you self-esteem and it gets you the esteem of other people. But when you demand it, you never get it. So the question that came up when we were talking this afternoon was, is it always aggressive to be assertive? And what are, Tony, what are the methods, the ways that other people can, if they don't want to, be married to, I have the right answer. And it closes, when it does, it closes your mind to being open to maybe learning something new from the other person. So do you have any tips for the audience?
well, yeah, one of the things that I think for me is very important is that when something is true, it's not a truth. Truth is a whole different concept. When something is true, some fact, that doesn't mean that it's right, that it's good, because often you can take something that's true and take it in a particular context and say it to someone. And in doing so, you hurt the person. You don't really make anything better. It's a true statement that said in a particular context, usually conflict, that's made to hurt people. Maybe not intentionally, or maybe intentionally. So the point of assertion for me is and that Louise made me rethink this, is that it's a question of what is your disposition. It's not the truth that you have to find. It's not what's right or what's correct or what's just. Is what is it you can do that's kind and that's gentle, so that there was a term I got it from one of these used to get these Hindu and Buddhist sayings. It says the three things you need to think about before you talk. Is it true? Is it kind? And does it improve upon silence? And I was brought to mind when we had this discussion. This is a kind of very useful tool. So if you have something that's true, but it's not kind, you have to think about whether or not you want to use that in your exchange. If so, to me, the whole notion of kindness and gentleness is the antidote to any kind of assertion that is strident, or any kind of assertion that is ego-based. because you start from a different premise. You don't start from saying, okay, this is the facts, and I'm carrying the banner of the truth. I'm just carrying information. And if you start with kindness, you start with gentleness, then you have a basis on which to have some sort of exchange that is not based on people saying, okay, I agree or disagree, or, this is not a math formula we have here. We're not doing axioms in algebra. This is people. This is life that we are experiencing, and it has a lot of nuances to it, which we have to understand.
Tony, there's a modern day cousin to what you were saying. A friend of mine always says, does it have to be said? Does it have to be said by me? And does it have to be said now?
So before we kind of open this up, hopefully you'll have some comments on this. How do you move from a thought to an action? Because nothing happens unless you make an effort. So what happens when you get from the thought, get from the position, okay, I want to have some sort of engagement, some thought.
Tony, I'd like to do something I forgot to do again. I'd like to invite Zoomers to enter any thoughts or questions you might have for Tony in the chat. Brother Eric, will they be able to speak? Okay, and you can even speak. Okay, thank you.
So my feeling is you have to find a way in exchange to find a way of bringing something kind, gentle into the exchange. If you start with that, then you diffuse any kind of tension, which is, tension is a very corrosive thing that you really have to avoid. It's one of the things that I really think is one of the big problems with conflict is conflict immediately creates tension. And tension is a very, very bad thing for you. And this is from someone who 20 years ago felt tension was a fantastic thing because it was motivating, did things. I felt tension was a great thing because I moved things, I got things done. But I come to understand tension is a very corrosive thing. It doesn't do anything. It never helps you. At the end, it's always something that just drains you. And at best, it drains you. And at worst, it creates a internal conflicts that are very, very difficult to overcome as they maintain themselves over time. So conflict creates tension. So if you can start the exchange without conflict, and for that, you start with being kind, being gentle. Because as soon as you start an adversarial exchange, you got a problem. You're in a what I consider that violence. That's you're in a conflict, and that would be violence because people are now in opposite camps and they're having an exchange that can turn very, very negative, and at best it becomes very tense. So you don't have to examine what other people are saying and doing. You have to examine your own reaction, your own position. Because if the process of engagement with anybody else is involved in trying to figure them out, and you're looking at yourself, you're going to have a very difficult time having an exchange that's going to make you both feel that we both contributed to the process. Okay, Luis, let me open this up.
Yet at the moment. So is there anyone in the audience who would like to raise a question? Okay. Shanti.
Om Shanti. I have an opinion. first question is, you say that you start with something nice. So could you give an example of a situation where you start off saying something nice to diffuse the situation? To diffuse the situation? And the second question is, are you saying that um, nonviolence or violence would include things that are not physical? Because it sounds like that's what you're saying.
Okay. The second question, yes, violence includes, as far as I'm concerned, anything that has to do with something that hurts another person, whether it's intentional or non-intentional. Words, emotional engagements that are negative, anything that in which the action hurts somebody else, either emotionally, intellectually, physically, is violence. I mean, violence is not just physical violence. That's just one issue. Actually, I think it's been shown that children growing up with parents who were emotionally abusive have more difficult time than just parents who were very strict and had corporeal punishment, but weren't that way. So it's a very interesting kind of psychological nuance, but violence in all its forms creates problems. So so your first part of the question is, how do you start being nice? Okay. Well, the example I used before was someone says, you said that I was a very domineering person, or I was a very opinionated person. And you never said that. Okay. You never made that comment. But this person is now convinced that you did this. Someone she knew told her that. And obviously someone she respects, because otherwise she wouldn't be repeating it to you. If your first reaction is, that's not true. How can you say that? How can you think that about me? After all, we've known each. How can you say that? That's not kind. That's not gentle. That already puts you into a kind of a adversarial situation, because the person in front of you is angry because they think you said something wrong, and you're angry. So what do? You say, okay, what is the reaction that they're having? They're upset because they think I hurt them. The first thing you say is, no, that was never my intent to say anything hurtful to you. I'm sorry if it was interpreted that way, because you can't attack the other person who's not there, because that other person is not there. It's just a
Exactly.
kind of a reference.
Third party.
And so that is the most important thing, is you got to stop that exchange right there. Then you say, well, that was, I'm sorry it was misinterpreted, and it was never my intent. Then after you that, you can begin to unknot this knot that was created by someone. And it may be actually an innocent thing. You may have said something and it was misinterpreted or misheard, and then this was said to someone else. So it's not like there was malicious intent anywhere along the line. But if you react like it was a malicious intent, then it becomes a conflict. And generally, these kinds of things are with people that you know, people that are even close to you. So it gets even more intense, because you're saying, how can this be happening to me? And it's because we feel that we haven't done anything wrong. Now we're being accused of something. So our immediate reaction is, okay, where was the jury? When was I found guilty of this? So that really, the first reaction, first thought, okay, what's the problem? How can I do this in a kind of gentle way, a kind way, without creating more tension?
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you shared this evening. For me, I just especially enjoy, value, and wish to hold the no harm. So powerful. And I loved especially the points you made about thinking one's point is, my point is important. Why? In addition to anything that might be objective, I think I'm important. So therefore, of course, my point is important. And being right rather than doing right is problematic. You also asked what is I believe, in other words, you asked, well, what is the point really of the interchange? And I would like to say my best understanding is that it has to do with creating a quality of relationship and building harmony, building connection, rather than creating separation. And when an individual perhaps approaches me or you and says, I heard you said, they're very invested in their own ego. And if I reply with, I never did such a thing, that's self-protection of my ego in turn. So we then, I believe, have two egos in combat. And it occurs to me that in addition to thinking that I'm important and my point is important, if I can adopt and hold and live the reality that we are both important, that the other is important as well, and hold that. We are both important at this moment, and I equalize myself with the other. That's very beneficial. In terms of a particular technique about being kind, if you will, being gentle, I've learned these things, if they're of any benefit at all, to, if you will, begin with yes, begin with making the other right. So if somebody approaches me and says, I heard you said, and let's say it's true, okay, let's put that aside. Let's say it's not true, it was a misinterpretation or a fabrication or a delusion. It occurs to me if I meet the other person where they are, I can say, oh, what a hurtful idea. How unpleasant to have received that idea or that communication. I'm terribly sorry this has occurred. Start with that. And then move into whatever other, I loved what you said about, perhaps it was a misunderstanding or whatever. I also could apologize if I did it. It was a bad moment. It was a weak moment. I'm sorry. I was upset and I misspoke. I apologize. Is another possibility if it's true. Hopefully it's not true. I just wanted to share that. I'm very glad I'm here this evening.
Thank you. I think one of the things you said, I really want to reemphasize is that if you're with another person, what's the reason you're with the person? It's because you want to have a positive engagement. If you're with the other person and you don't want to have positive engagement, there's nothing positive is going to come out of it, obviously, because you're not there to have a positive exchange. So the important thing is like the quality of the relationship. I like the term that you use, the quality of the relationship that you're trying to create with the other person. That is really the basis. If you're trying to create an engagement that's have a quality that's very positive, then you have to begin with that particular notion. I want something good to happen here. I want to be kind and I want to be gentle because that's how you create relationships. So I think that emphasis on what is the quality of your relationship that you're creating with the person. Because if you're with a person and you don't want to be with them, then you shouldn't have too many exchanges of any kind. This is basically what happens.
Okay, we have a few more. Herman wrote something in the chat, but Herman, I'd like to invite you to speak. You can unmute and speak if you'd like to instead.
Okay,
Okay, hi.
thank you. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
I understand the quality of this conversation is what makes it so great because I fully understand the part of where lots of times I find myself in that situation where I am trying to express and I'm trying to push on that I know that what I'm saying is correct and I'm trying to emphasize it and say it in different ways rather than backing away and saying, well, being a little apologetic or being kind to the extent, as you say, instead of holding on to my guns, as you would say, because what it seems to do is it turns the other person off. They engage in combating what you're saying, and then there's no means of agreement. As a matter of fact, uh, the conversation becomes a chaos, and then no one is happy. So I think it's very valid the way you handle the situation. Truth is always something very difficult to express if the other person is going to interpret it as you are admonishing them, you're telling them where they're wrong. So yeah, man, this is great. I love this conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Herman. Michelle?
You're welcome.
Thank you. I echo what Herman said, I think, and Judy, that this is a very important conversation. I wish other people were listening, but I want to make a comment. Actually, it's Judy, you said this to me early on in my travels, and I've used it as an experiment. You said, let the other person win sometimes. Remember?
Mhm.
I remember. And that really is an important thing that I've taken on, that, that ego of, it's the most powerful thing to do is to let the other person win. They're often surprised and in awe. And it really is the exchange. And I found subsequently that person is much more open to my conversation, my, ideas. So I wanted to thank you, Judy, for that. And this fits in very well to that concept of, putting your own personal ego and arrogance, if you will, aside and allowing the other to really listen and, boy, let them win. And it is so empowering. You know who it's empowering for? For yourself. It's a very powerful thing. So I really appreciate, Tony, all you've said and everyone sharing yours too. Very important questions. Thank you.
And I have to just add a PS to what Michelle said. I'm always saying that I shock people and surprise people when I don't come on really aggressively. And I don't keep hammering my point, because for a zillion decades, that's what I always did. And that's a little surprise attack of peace, not violence. Okay, anyone else before we begin to conclude? Anyone on Zoom have a comment or a question? Anybody else here? No? Okay. So, you know what we didn't talk about? I don't know if you want to or not, but we have a few moments. Personal violence to oneself. Does that fit in with this conversation tonight?
Yeah, it's a very big issue. I mean, violence to oneself is actually almost worse situation, because what happens is that this is an example I have to take from the first time I came to a BK retreat, and someone made an example of what happens when someone says something to you that's negative. You have a relative, brother, sister, friend, close friend, that says something bad about you, something that shocks you, right? And you're kind of, wow, this person said this thing about me. And then the person goes away, generally it's someone that that you see. And that person goes away, and whatever they said about you, now they hurt you the first time. Then what happens? Later you remember this and you hurt yourself. The person's no longer there. They may have forgotten what they told you. They may have not even remembered that they said something negative to you. It may have been a passing thought that wasn't well thought out, but you remember. So you take the knife that they stabbed you with first time and you hold on to it and you keep stabbing yourself, sometimes for the rest of your life. That is a very, very powerful part of what we need to deal with in ourselves, is that when someone says something negative about us, right? When someone, there's two types of violence. One is we believe it. And it reduces our self-esteem. And we say, okay, it's true. I am this terrible person. I am this person with these particular qualities. And it becomes difficult for you to do anything about it because you're inculcating into yourself a negative vision of yourself. That's one thing. And the other thing that's bad is when someone says something about you that's bad, your ego is so engaged that you keep taking that statement and stabbing yourself with it instead of saying, well, is it true? If it's not true, does that person have an issue that maybe they understood something differently? So you don't really examine what it is, how it got to that statement got to be said. You only are concerned about the fact that it was said to you. Again, the ego. And you keep remembering this. And there are people that have entire lives, they're angry at someone because that person said this thing about them. And that person who said that thing about them may not even remember. But we remember because our ego was hurt. And we want to make sure that that ego is somehow avenged. So violence to yourself is actually a separate subject altogether.
And we keep replaying the same tape over and over again for a lifetime. You know, it's funny. Why is it we're so open to believing negative criticism of ourselves? But if someone gives you a compliment, you just don't know where to put your face, right? You know?
Saying no is a lot easier than saying yes. It's very easy to say no. It's very easy to say no.
Okay, we have a newcomer.
Just one comment. I think that the most common harm that we do to ourselves is keeping resentments. And I used to say that to keep resentments is like drinking poison, hoping that the other person is dying.
Thank you.
They're one of the three things that I've been working through my meditation to eliminate in my life: resentment, shame, and guilt. Those are three emotions that really have no place in the world. Even though they kind of define most people. Very bad things. You have to work to get rid of them, all three of them. And resentment is a particularly difficult one.
Corrosive. Absolutely. Well, this has been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. I just have one quick announcement before we ask you, Tony. Would you do a concluding meditative commentary for us? Just next week, we do have, where did I put it? Oh, yes, here we go. Alma Villegas. She's been here before, and she will talk about getting rid of worry, warts and all. Okay, so be sure to be here, because if you're a worrier, as so many of us are, especially lately, I'm sure she'll have a lot to teach us. So she's calling it a startup approach to nonviolence. So please join us in person if you can. Okay, Tony, thank you.
So we should focus on being kind to ourselves. Purging ourselves of all these negative and contentious, conflicting things that seem to hover around us constantly. Just sink, drop away from them, let them remain on the surface. Just go away, drop from them. Hold yourself into yourself. let all of these things just be like butterflies and insects to which you have a net so they cannot come in. To your center. To a center that's begins to feel the gentleness inherent in our being. Gentleness of thought, gentleness of purpose. Going deeper. Thinking about kindness. And how we can be kind to ourselves. And get rid of all of these feelings. Or at least keep them at bay. Experience these qualities that are innate in us. Gentleness, kindness, and as we explore these qualities in ourselves, we go deeper. We look at the tenderness that we are capable of experiencing and of helping others experience. This is where our core is. This is the place where we begin. Where love is born. Where all the things that bring us happiness and peace. This is the place where we must begin. First thoughts. Om Shanti.
Can you feel the feeling in the room here? So I hope you carry it out with you. Zoomers, turn off the screen, turn on your piece. And so good to see you all. Brother Eric, thank you so much. Brother Tony, beautiful evening. And don't leave without your Toli and your blessing. Om Shanti, everyone. See you next week. Thank you, Michelle, for the bio.